There is a certain kind of person who feels lonelier around people than they do by themselves. They can sit in a room full of voices, laughter, movement, and conversation, and still feel like they are watching life from behind glass. They are present, but not fully there. They smile when they are supposed to smile. They answer when someone speaks to them. They know how to act normal enough that no one asks too many questions. But somewhere inside, they feel distant. Not because they hate people, but because being around people often feels like becoming less real. If you suspect you might be one of those people, you may find yourself wondering why conversations drain your energy so fast, why small talk feels like an act, or why certain environments make you feel pressured to become smaller, quieter, or hide the most authentic parts of yourself. You watch others laugh freely, connect effortlessly, and move through social situations with ease. Yet for you, it can feel strangely unnatural. You can be surrounded by people and still have the unsettling feeling that no one truly sees or understands you. But perhaps the issue isn't that something is wrong with you. Sometimes, it's that you've begun to see things with greater clarity. You start noticing the subtle details that others overlook, the way someone smiles while quietly competing with you, or how people tell you to be yourself while only accepting the version of you that makes them comfortable. You notice how groups form unspoken rules about what can be discussed, what should be laughed off, what deserves admiration, and which parts of yourself you need to hide if you want to remain accepted. And once you start seeing these patterns, the way you experience social life begins to shift. You don't suddenly isolate yourself. Instead, something inside you gradually stops responding the way it once did. You hear the same jokes, opinions, and predictable conversations, but they no longer capture your attention. You begin to see the performance beneath the words. You recognize when kindness has an ulterior motive, when confidence is masking insecurity, and when people aren't expressing what they truly believe, but simply protecting the image they want others to see. And once you see that, pretending becomes harder. You stop forcing laughter. You stop explaining yourself to people who were never really listening. You stop pretending not to notice the small manipulations, the hidden competition, the way certain relationships only feel warm as long as you remain useful. From the outside, it may look like you're becoming distant, but internally, something deeper is taking place. You are not necessarily becoming colder. You are simply becoming less willing to take part in things that feel fake or dishonest. And people often notice this shift before you ever put it into words. They may not understand exactly what has changed, but they can sense that you are no longer playing the same role you once did. Your silence seems more intense. Your calmness becomes harder for them to interpret. And your distance may begin to feel like judgment to them, even when you never judge them at all. Because when you stop performing reassurance, people lose the version of you they were used to controlling. They expected you to laugh at the right moments, to explain yourself quickly, to soften the truth so the room stays comfortable, to respond when they pull on your attention, to keep giving them the same familiar version of you. But now, you pause. You observe before reacting. You listen more than you answer. You stop rushing to make everyone feel comfortable with your presence. And this can make people uncomfortable, not because you have become a threat, but because you are no longer as easy to predict. People understand how to deal with someone who constantly seeks approval. They know how to reward them, criticize them, pressure them, and pull them back into line. But when someone stops responding the way they used to, they become much harder to understand. So people begin labeling your distance cold, arrogant, antisocial, detached, or strange. Yet what they are really reacting to is far simpler. You stopped pretending to be the version of yourself that made them feel comfortable. This is why Carl Jung's idea of the persona matters. The persona is the social mask you learn to wear so you can survive around other people. It is the version of you that knows how to be acceptable, the polite version, the calm version, the useful version. The version that does not say too much, feel too deeply, question too openly, or disturb the comfort of the group. And everyone builds one. If you find this content valuable, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. I truly appreciate your support. Thank you for being here. From an early age, you begin learning which parts of yourself people accept and which ones lead to rejection. You discover which emotions make others uncomfortable, which opinions create conflict, and when being honest is celebrated versus quietly punished. So you adapt. You make your truth less sharp. You hide your intensity. You laugh even when nothing feels funny. You agree just enough to avoid creating tension. Little by little, you mold yourself into someone who is easier to understand, easier to accept, and easier for others to keep around. At first, this feels normal, but slowly, something dangerous happens. You stop expressing who you are and start managing how you are perceived. You no longer enter a room as yourself. You enter it already calculating. What can I say here? What should I hide? Which version of me will cause the least resistance? And the longer you live this way, the more draining other people can become. Because it isn't simply being around people that exhausts you, it's the constant effort required to remain acceptable in their eyes. The endless self-editing, the constant need to read the room, and the pressure to shrink yourself just to fit into a world that feels too small for the way your mind naturally works. This is why solitude begins to feel different. When you are alone, the mask can fall. There is no audience to impress, no group to satisfy, no role to maintain. No one asking you to become lighter, simpler, easier, more convenient, just silence, peace. And in that silence, you may begin to realize something uncomfortable. Maybe you were never afraid of being alone. Maybe you were afraid of being yourself around people who only accepted your mask. And this is where the first crack begins. Not always through some dramatic betrayal. Sometimes it is much quieter than that. A friend who only appears when they need something. A relationship that feels warm until you set a boundary. A group that praises honesty until your honesty makes them uncomfortable. A person who calls you important but disappears the moment you stop being useful. At first, you try to explain it. You convince yourself that people are simply complicated, that everyone has their own reasons, and that perhaps you misunderstood what happened. Maybe you expected too much. Maybe you're just being overly sensitive. But something within you continues to observe. You begin recognizing patterns, the way kindness can disappear when there is nothing left to gain, how loyalty can become conditional when someone's comfort is challenged, and how people may praise honesty in principle but reject it when the truth threatens the image they have built of themselves. And once these patterns become impossible to ignore, something inside you starts to pull away. Not emotionally at first, but mentally. You become less willing to trust appearances at face value. You stop taking every smile as genuine. You stop mistaking closeness for true loyalty. And you stop assuming that everyone who enjoys having you around genuinely respects and values the person you really are. From the outside, it may look like you are becoming distant, but inside, your illusions are collapsing. And when illusions collapse, your behavior changes. You stop chasing conversations that feel forced. You stop keeping relationships alive by carrying all the emotional weight. You stop explaining your silence to people who are comfortable with your performance but confused by your truth. Your responses become more brief. Your tolerance for social games gradually fades. You stop feeling the need to constantly prove that you care. You stop apologizing every time you set a boundary. And you no longer feel obligated to give someone immediate access to your time and attention simply because they became accustomed to having it. And this is when people start noticing the difference. Many relationships are built around predictability. They expect you to respond the same way, offer reassurance the same way, tolerate the same behavior, and continue playing the role that once made the relationship feel secure. But now, something within you has shifted. You think before giving your energy. You observe before deciding to trust. You turn down things you once accepted, and you walk away from conversations that only seem designed to pull you back into the person you used to be. And people may call this distance, but what they are really seeing is the moment you stop betraying your own awareness just to keep the illusion alive. And this is where the circle begins to shrink, not always through arguments, not always through betrayal. Sometimes people simply stop reaching for you when they realize you no longer respond the way you used to. The conversations become shorter, the invitations become fewer, the warmth becomes conditional. You start noticing that some connections only survived because you kept feeding them with your old self. And in the beginning, this change can feel like something you're losing. You may question whether you're becoming too distant, too guarded, or simply too difficult for others to be around. That familiar fear can return the fear that if you stop pretending to be who others expect, you'll eventually end up alone. This is the point where many people retreat. They start apologizing for being honest. They make themselves smaller again. They put the mask back on. They return to laughing at things that feel meaningless, agreeing with things they know aren't true, and holding on to relationships that only survive when they silence or abandon parts of who they really are. But some people do not go back. Some keep walking deeper into the silence, not because it is comfortable, but because returning to the old illusion now feels worse. Once you have seen how much of your belonging depended on performance, you cannot fully unsee it. And this is the true turning point. You stop seeing your solitude as rejection. You begin seeing it as filtration. People who only knew your mask begin to disappear. At first it hurts, because even false belonging can feel like belonging when you are used to it. Even shallow connection can feel difficult to lose when it was once part of your identity. But gradually, your perspective begins to change. You start realizing that not everyone who walks away is truly a loss. Some people were only connected to the version of you that made them feel comfortable, the agreeable version, the helpful version, the one who always responded quickly, explained everything, softened every truth, and remained constantly available. And when that version of you disappears, they disappear with it. And this is where your emotional foundation begins to change. You stop seeking approval from people who only appreciated the version of you that performed for them. You stop trying to repair relationships that only worked when you kept your honesty hidden. You stop seeing someone's absence as proof that you were rejected. Sometimes distance is protection. Sometimes the emptiness around you isn't evidence that you failed to fit in. It can be a sign that your life is creating space for something more genuine. And this is where being alone begins to change you in a deeper way. Because once the noise fades, the parts of you that were buried for approval begin to rise again. Jung called this buried side the shadow. But the shadow is not only darkness, cruelty, or evil. It is everything you had to hide in order to be accepted. Your anger, your ambition, your directness, your refusal, your skepticism, your need for space, your ability to say no without explaining it for an hour. Those parts of yourself were never destroyed. They were simply pushed into exile, and solitude can give them the space to come back. At first, that process may feel uncomfortable. You might begin experiencing emotions you once buried: anger, where you used to feel guilt; disgust, where you once forced yourself to tolerate things; and clarity, where you once made excuses. You may eventually realize that certain situations weren't confusing because they were truly complicated. They felt confusing because you were trying to preserve an image of people that reality had already shattered. This is why walking alone can feel harsh. It removes the distractions that helped you avoid yourself. There is no crowd to blend into, no role to hide behind, no constant social noise to keep your deeper instincts quiet. You are left with the truth of what you actually feel, and sometimes that truth is not gentle. You may realize that you weren't as patient as you believed. You were simply afraid of conflict. You weren't as forgiving as you thought. You were afraid of losing people. You weren't naturally as calm as you imagined. You had simply learned to suppress your own reactions. But recognizing this does not mean you have failed. It means the process of integration has begun. The person who chooses to walk alone isn't merely distancing themselves from others. They are finally beginning to reconnect with the parts of themselves they abandoned just to feel accepted. And once you begin facing your own shadow, something strange happens. You start seeing other people differently too. Not as saviors, not as enemies, not as perfect friends, perfect lovers, perfect families, or pure villains. You begin seeing them as they are, beings driven by fear, insecurity, hunger, pride, shame, and the need to protect their own image. This does not make you hateful toward people. It simply makes you more clear-eyed. You stop idealizing others so easily. You stop mistaking charm for genuine goodness. You stop confusing attention with loyalty. You no longer accept every apology simply because it sounds sincere or emotional. Instead, you begin paying attention to what people protect, what they avoid, how they behave when things slip out of their control, and how they treat you once you are no longer useful to them. And this clarity changes your expectations. You no longer expect everyone to be deep. You no longer expect every connection to be honest. You no longer expect people to choose truth when illusion protects them better. And because your expectations drop, your reactions become quieter. You are less shocked by selfishness, less desperate for approval, less confused by betrayal. Not because these things no longer hurt, but because you understand them differently. You begin to understand that much of human behavior isn't as personal as it seems. It follows patterns. People repeat whatever helps them feel protected. They defend the identity they are unwilling to question. They attack whatever threatens to expose them. They gravitate toward what validates their beliefs about themselves. And once you recognize this, you stop wasting your energy fighting every illusion. You stop trying to awaken people who are comfortable remaining asleep. You stop explaining the truth to those who benefit from misunderstanding it. And you stop expecting genuine honesty from environments built around performance. This is not bitterness. It is the beginning of discernment. And discernment is one of the gifts of walking alone. And as your ability to discern grows, your relationship with approval begins to change. In the past, praise could draw you closer, while rejection could make you question your own worth. A strange tone, a cold message, or someone suddenly becoming distant could disturb your entire inner world. You would replay the situation, search for explanations, defend yourself, and try to restore the connection to what it once was. But learning to walk alone changes that. Gradually, you stop treating every reaction as a judgment of your character. You stop believing that approval proves you are good, or that disapproval means you are wrong. People may misunderstand you, and you no longer feel the need to correct every story they create about you. They can call you distant, difficult, arrogant, or cold, and somehow those labels no longer have the power to break you like they once did. This is when others begin to feel a deeper shift. Because most social systems depend on invisible levers. Praise brings people closer. Shame pushes them back into place. Guilt makes them available. Rejection makes them obedient. But when those levers stop working on you, people feel it. You become harder to steer. Not aggressive, not hostile, just less available to manipulation. And to people who are used to controlling others through approval or rejection, this feels unsettling. Because you cannot easily control someone who no longer needs you to tell them who they are. And this is where walking alone becomes more than simply creating distance. It becomes a form of self-possession. Not the loud confidence that demands attention, nor the pride of someone determined to prove they need nobody, but a quiet transformation in which your identity no longer depends on the environment around you. You stop defining yourself through other people's reactions. Their praise can still feel good, but it no longer determines your worth. Their criticism may still hurt, but it no longer has the power to break you. And when they misunderstand you, it may frustrate you, but it no longer takes control of your thoughts. Something inside you becomes harder to move, and this is what many people mistake for coldness. They are used to a version of you that could be pulled into explanation, guilt, emotional urgency, or the need to be seen correctly. But now you do not rush as quickly. You do not bend as easily. You do not offer your inner world to every person who wants access to it. You carry yourself differently, calmer, quieter, more deliberate. And the more your center moves inward, the less the crowd knows what to do with you. This change does not announce itself loudly. It shows in small behaviors. You stop filling silence just to make other people comfortable. You stop attending things that exist only to maintain appearances. You stop entering conversations that are really competitions for attention. You stop giving emotional reactions to people who are only trying to provoke one. In relationships, you become more selective about who you allow close to you. You stop revealing your deepest parts simply because someone feels familiar. Instead, you begin valuing consistency over promises and paying closer attention to how people behave when they are disappointed, when things don't go their way, or when they can no longer get what they want from you. In social spaces, you become quieter, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer feel the need to prove that you belong. You listen, you notice tone, you notice hidden tension. You notice how often people agree publicly while thinking something else privately. And in work, family, friendships, and ordinary life, you begin stepping out of games you once played automatically. Status games, guilt games, obligation games. The silent pressure to laugh, attend, reply, explain, agree, perform, compete, and stay available. People may not understand it, but they feel the result. You become harder to pull into noise, harder to guilt into presence, harder to pressure into places where your spirit feels out of place. And that is when walking alone becomes more than an emotional condition. It becomes a way of navigating life. The world begins to feel quieter, not because everything around you has suddenly become peaceful, but because you no longer respond to every distraction trying to pull you back into who you used to be. The conversations become less frequent. The invitations begin to fade, and some people naturally disappear because the version of you they once knew is no longer there. At first, this feels like loss, but slowly, you realize the quiet is not empty. It is showing you what was hidden under the noise. You begin to hear your own thoughts again. You begin to feel which desires are truly yours, and which ones were planted in you by approval, fear, family, or the need to belong. This is the strange gift of walking alone. Your outer world becomes smaller, but your inner world becomes sharper. And this is where Jung's idea of individuation becomes important. Because walking alone is not supposed to be a lifestyle of bitterness. It is not about becoming untouchable, unreachable, or permanently detached from the world. It is a psychological passage, a separation from the false self, so the real self can begin to take shape. Individuation is the journey of becoming whole, not the version of yourself that your family accepted, not the person your friends could easily understand, not the identity society rewarded, and not the version you created simply to avoid rejection. It is the process of discovering your complete self, the person who can finally exist without constantly needing permission to be authentic. And this is why solitude changes a person so deeply. When you are alone, there is no crowd to perform for, no role to maintain, no one clapping when you become what they want, and no one punishing you when you become something they cannot understand. You are left with your own thoughts, your own instincts, your own wounds, your own truth. And eventually, you begin asking yourself, which parts of me were genuine, and which parts were simply ways of surviving? That question can be deeply uncomfortable. It may reveal that some of your kindness came from fear, that some of your patience was actually self-neglect, and that certain relationships were built around what you could provide. You may discover that some of your ambitions were inherited from others, while some of the beliefs you carried for years were never truly your own. But this is not destruction. This is the old mask losing power. The person who walks alone begins to stop borrowing identity from the group. They stop needing every room to confirm who they are. They stop adjusting their values to match the people around them. They stop treating acceptance as proof of truth, and slowly, something more stable begins to form inside. A center, not arrogance, not hatred, not the need to prove that you are different. Just a quiet inner authority that says, I know what I have seen. I know what I feel. I know what I value. I know where I no longer belong. This is the true purpose of walking alone, not to escape life, but to return to it with a self that cannot be so easily erased, not to reject people, but to stop entering relationships as someone who must disappear in order to be loved, not to become cold, but to become conscious enough to choose where your warmth belongs. Because the person who has walked through solitude properly does not come back weaker. They come back less available to illusion. But there is a danger in solitude. It can make you more self-aware, but it can also turn into bitterness if you use it only to judge others, reject the world, or hide behind old wounds. In that case, you are not truly free. You are still being controlled by the things that once hurt you. Walking alone is not about resenting the world or shutting everyone out. It is about becoming strong enough to face the world without sacrificing who you are. If you're walking alone right now, maybe it doesn't mean you failed to belong. Maybe it means you finally stopped abandoning yourself just to earn acceptance. The silence may feel heavy at first, and the distance may feel unfamiliar. But sometimes, the space around you isn't emptiness at all. It's the space your authentic self needed to finally return. Because being alone was never the real punishment. The real punishment was losing yourself just to avoid being alone.